Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom. And in this video, we're going to look at a semi-monster classic and something I'm pretty sure a lot of people don't realize it's a book. And that would be this. This is The Phantom of the Opera. Now, of all the Halloween books, the classical Halloween scary books that I'm covering, this is the only one I actually physically own. The rest of them I'll read on ebook. I probably should buy some of them physically, but not on my radar right now. So, again, this is The Phantom of the Opera. Of all the monster stories that we're covering, this one is actually, they cut out the tragic backstory. They do a lot of funky things with Dracula and vampires. We'll cover that. We're covering Dracula. They do some very, very funky thing with Frankenstein, completely missed the point. With this, again, they do actually miss the point, but with Dracula, they have the films have a tendency to give him a tragic backstory. With Phantom of the Opera, they cut out the tragic backstory, which is interesting. And, well, against the main media coming from there, why there's Phantom everything. Most people know the British giant Broadway musical that is loosely based on this mess. By Gaston Leroux. This is a translated copy because it was written in French. Because French. So, The Phantom of the Opera. The tragic backstory. So, here's the tragic backstory. One, this is dark. I'm not going to recommend it for anybody maybe younger than 10. And I'm not going to think, particularly not 10-year-old boys, are going to have any interest in this book whatsoever because it's a romance. And yes, they do get that kind of right. But again, they cut out a whole bunch of tragic backstories. They cut out the backstories with this book. So, here's the tragic backstories with these books. Now, and they make the Phantom, because microphones look different. It's an entire, typically a face mask with him that he's wearing because he has beady little yellow eyes and he looks kind of skeletal. So, apparently he was born that way. And that's the thing. He was born that way. He ended up in a circus. He learns all sorts of things, including throwing his voice. And he's kind of this magical thing that he knows everything. He's he's an inventor. He's an architect. He's a master at ventriloquism, which is thus the throwing of the voice. He's an opera singer, and he's still a tragic back figure. So, you pretty much have his life. The first part literally covers his life where he's pretty much abandoned by his family because he's ugly. These beady little yellow eyes and a skeletal-looking face. Apparently, even as a small child. He ends up with the circus, which is where he learns a bunch of stuff like the ventriloquism, and he's also good with locks. So, and I don't know where the heck he learns the architecture, but he ends up in India and building this castle, and I think possibly torture chambers. He does in the Paris Opera House. No, that's not explained. But apparently he refuses a concubine, and essentially the Arab person. Yeah, this book is a little racist when it comes to the Arab area and India because it's written by a French man during, when was this book published? I'm pretty sure it's very, very old. Well, this thing was published in 1990. I'm pretty sure this was written in the 1800s. I'm going to do a quick double check on Wikipedia when the Phantom of the Opera was actually published, because it's definitely imperialism here. Let's put in the Phantom of the Opera real quick if I can spell. The Phantom of the Opera, the actual book. Yes. And let's see, published in serial form between the 23rd of September 1909 and the 8th of January 1910. So, yeah, turn of the century. So, yeah, the racism is seen in this book. So, he basically gets in trouble and he's rescued by I think the Arab, I can't remember what, it's not, is that simply the Arab, or what the heck they call him? Let's see, yeah, there's a whole bunch of things. Literally the first multiple chapters are him, the Persian, that's the name of the character, who's done very, very bad in the films. Lindsay Ellis does an entire video on the Persian and how he's left out. She also does a heck of a lot more Phantom of the Opera stuff. She was very, very into the Phantom of the Opera. She also has a film degree, which I do not. I have a history degree and a library degree. So she does a whole big detail into this. But yeah, the Persian's pretty much left out of most people's renditions here. So, short story, Phantom gets to Paris, somehow gets involved in essentially builds or designs the Paris Opera House and a whole bunch of hidden tunnels and things and two-way mirrors. He then falls in love with a young girl by the name of Christine, who is part of the Corps de Ballet, I believe, which means, yeah, she's basically in the chorus. And she does sing. Her father was a singer, and he died. And the Phantom falls in love with her and uses the idea that her father sent her an angel of music to teach her how to sing. And that's the big thing. He is her angel of music. And his other thing is the core of this story, where after you get through the backstory, is that the opera house is being sold, and the new owners are being basically shown. It's like, oh, by the way, we've been preserving this one box and paying this guy so he doesn't destroy things or kill people. And of course, the new owners are like, you got to be joking and you're crazy. And then they spend part of the book, you get their point of view of trying to find the mystery of who the heck this Phantom is and trying to catch him, and then people dying. And then you have a couple of other things going on, because this book gets very, very confusing and is jumping around all the time. You have the Phantom, whose name is Eric. He does in fact have a name. His name is Eric. He exists. So that is his actual human name, because he is an actual mortal human. So he's coaxing Christine and then trying to force, using various tricks, to get her in the prime spot over one of the opera divas. So in the meantime, and she also has a nurse, because she's young. I think she's like 16 in this. She's somewhere between, she's no older than 18, but I think she's roughly about 16. I could be wrong in this. I'll double check the Wikipedia page to see if it actually tells me, rather than skimming through the book, which would take forever. Let's see. Yes, it just tells me Christine. It doesn't exactly tell me her age, no. So what happens there is, I think one of the opening nights after the new owners take place, a young viscount by the name of Raoul, who knew Christine when they were children, sees her and falls in love with her at first sight, because of course they do. She kind of sees him, tries to deny he exists because she's dealing with her angel of music, and eventually she does admit she loves him. She also by this time figures out that she's been slightly at one point in time kidnapped by Eric, who takes her to his underground lair and tries to keep her there. And then I think he's slightly convinced by the Persian who's hanging around trying to prevent the Phantom from killing everybody, because he's a bloodthirsty monster. And once Christine, he tries to keep her there. She knows what he looks like, and he eventually allows her, I think after a couple of weeks, to escape and to leave. And she gets engaged to Raoul. There's a whole scenes where she goes to her father's grave, and Raoul follows her, and he's a bit of a douchebag because French. I've heard various stories about the French men, and not to mention this is the turn of the century, so chauvinism was common and normal, as was doing all sorts of things. So she was objectified. because it's the 1900s. And of course she is, because it's the 1900s. So there's a whole lot of back and forth. You had this love triangle between Eric and Raoul and Christine keeps going back and forth. She doesn't actually want to be with the Phantom. She knows what he looks like, and he's scary. Because he's his old skeletal yellow eyes, skeletal face. He's scary looking, and he's creepy. So, and she realizes he's human and he's not an angel, which is what she thought he was. And so you have the huge back and forth, and then they try to capture the Phantom by playing the opera he's written. And then he uses it essentially to kidnap Christine. So, and Raoul, with the help of, I think his brother is involved here, and I can't remember exactly, but his brother is completely cut out of the play as well as the Persian, and they give him to various plot points. But his brother is killed, I believe, and then the Persian helps Raoul go down there to rescue Christine. And he tells him, it's like, keep your hands in front of your face, because the Phantom likes to use a weapon that's basically a sharp, I think it's a garrote. It could be similar to a garrote, where he basically sluts your neck off. I think it's or what it's described as. Basically, it's a long pole with a metal hoop at the end that he sticks over your head and strangles you. Or cuts your head off, depending on the situation. So they protect themselves, but they end up in his torture chamber, where essentially you hear running water and it slowly heats up. And yeah, that's kind of torturous. So basically you're roasting in an oven. I don't know exactly how they explain how he does this, but again, he's some brilliant architect. So he's trying to kill them both. Christina begs for their lives. He's going to blow up the opera house. Eventually she convinces him by kissing him to let them go, and that's kind of the end. The Persian passes out. He wakes up. The Phantom says, I let them go, and then he disappears, and I believe it's assumed he dies at the end by letting them go, as opposed to being murdered, which essentially has a tendency to happen at various ends of films, because of course he's the villain, he has to die. Like that. That's how it ends. Look at the very end of the book here. Yeah. Like, and most of this looks like it's being told by the Persian. So let's see. Yeah. No, it looks like he left. So yes, Eric, he went to Asia Minor and then Constantinople, and let's see. Actually, this is... what on earth is this? Let's see now. Yeah, he dies. Yeah. Pretty much he's a tragic figure. And supposedly, yes, dies. Yeah. He just kind of goes... yeah. They find him underneath. Yeah, that's what it ends. They find his corpse in the base of the inside the basement of the opera house. So that's kind of how he is. He's a tragic figure, less so a villain. I mean, he was my cats are doing strange things. The banging sound. But he's less a villain and more a tragic figure. He was treated horribly his entire life because he was ugly. He was a tragic genius. He couldn't have love because he, again, ugly and scary looking. So, and he has to let the girl go because he has some sort of conscience, and that's kind of his arc. This is very much his story of how his life goes, and it's told by the Persian. It seems, when I was like, that's the implication, that it's told by the Persian who is telling his story, because he's the one who knew him the best and knew him the longest and followed him there because he was exiled himself for rescuing him. And it's an interesting story. It's not, I would not consider the Phantom of the Opera horror, because again, it's a combination of love story and mystery and just kind of tragedy of anything else. So he's a very tragic figure, and a jack of all trades, and it's just kind of funny to read through this, as well as you have the whole mystery thing of the two owners of the opera house trying to figure out who he is, why he kills people. He does kill a couple of people throughout this, usually occasionally garroting them or dropping things on them, and they just kind of die, and tormenting people, because that's what he does, because he wants Christine and he wants love, and he's sad and tragic, and that is Eric, and it is spelled with a K in this book, not with a C. I don't know if that's French or just something the author decided to use. So it's an interesting book. It's a little bouncy, but if your kids are, or you yourself are interested in the backstory of the Phantom of the Opera, or looking for something, particularly if you're studying certain periods of history, I think it's always a good idea to read fictional books that were written around that time period, because you can kind of get more of a feel of the beliefs and the ideas of people of the time, because they would have enjoyed it. I'm going to do a quick look at the end of this in the Wikipedia to see if it was popular behind me on this. Let's see. Let's see. Was it popular? Let's see. Music, mystery, romance, adaptations, of which there are dozens and dozens and dozens. Let's see. Not telling me if it was popular. I'm assuming, since it's still in publication, that it was in fact popular at the time. So yeah, I mean, seriously, there have been dozens upon dozens of movie adaptations and film adaptations, and people are obsessed with this, and half the time they forget the tragic backstory. So, and they forget the Persian. I mean, Lindsay Ellis does an entire video on how they forget the Persian in most of these renditions, which is very, very interesting and enjoyable to watch. But it's a good book. Again, it's dark in the sense that this is a very tragic story of a tragic figure who does kill people, and there's some whole creepy man behavior going on here that would have been very normal at the turn of the century. Stalking and trying to get girls to love you and stuff like that, and you have the whole weird love triangle and kidnapping, and nurses not quite understanding that no, you're charged not be going after some weird strange man who's talking her through a two-way mirror. Yeah, strange things are going on. But again, this is a mixture of mystery and tragedy and kind of action in this sense, and a love story all thrown in together. So it makes for an interesting read. Again, there is some sexy and kind of inappropriate male behavior in this, so probably not younger than 12, unless you're really going to talk about it. I also don't think they'd get anything from it if they're younger than 12, because there are some obviously very mature topics going on in this book, as opposed to Dracula, which can probably be read by a 10-year-old if they're interested enough in the gore. Frankenstein, probably not, but we'll get there. This is, again, I enjoyed this. It's an enjoyable read. This is an original. Let's see, it's 274 pages, so not too long. Not too long compared to some other classics, which are like huge. And no, I'm probably not going to cover a lot of classics because I haven't read them, and occasionally they're boring, and most people know what they are anyway. So this one is actually relatively unknown. Most people know everything that came out of it. They don't realize it was a book. So it's one of these things. I enjoy it. It's a great kind of horror stuff. It's not strictly Halloween-y. It's very good to, if you want to feel for French, for the France at the turn of the century, because that's when this was published, and kind of looking at what they enjoyed and kind of viewpoints there, and the interest in opera and the opera house and this kind of tragic backstory, minus the racism. But again, that's something to talk about, and to realize that this book was written in the turn of the century, similar to The Wizard of Oz, kind of similar to the Little House on the Prairie books. It's when it was written. You can't really take that away, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. You would get very mad at some of the behaviors without realizing. This is published in France in 1910. So yes, it basically reflects the views, particularly of men in France in 1910. So it's a little rapey and really, really creepy. It's very, very creepy. It's more creepy than it is scary, minus, some of the torture chambers. And again, the Phantom is a very, very interesting character in this book, as opposed to the film where he seems pretty one-sided and obsessive and just angry. Here he has a whole complicated, tragic backstory. You have the Persian, you have his horrible life, and the fact that he does in fact have a full face mask, not the partial ones that you see because microphones and musicals. Problem with face masks. Yes, there's whole information on that and how they did that. Lindsay Ellis does multiple videos on the Phantom of the Opera that are very, very good and far more complex and far more well done than my kind of randomly looking at, again, a decent book. So that's going to be the end of this review. I'll stop kind of rambling. I do recommend this 12 and older, really, if they're interested in that kind of classics era, particularly if you're choosing for history, you're covering the 1900s and you're covering Europe around the 1900s. It's a good book to read, to kind of as a way to look into the past. And that's when you have books like this where they were written around a certain time period. It's good to get the feel of that time period. It's one of the only ways you kind of get to know the people that lived during that time, because this is what they enjoy. This is their fiction. So this is something that this was done in serial form, which is not really uncommon. Most of Dickens and Sherlock Holmes were all done in serial form. They were read in newspapers and magazines, which were more common and easier to print than books. And I think it paid more on occasion. But that's where a lot of stuff, particularly around this time period, was written. It was written piece by piece, and they would use it to the stories to keep people buying papers. So it was written piece by piece, and they were normally put into book form later. That was the same with Frankenstein. And I think a lot of Dickens stuff in Sherlock Holmes collections is, again, they were all bound together years later. So if you like this review, like and subscribe. I'm doing a bunch of Halloween stuff. I have all of Harry Potter going on right now. I do a sprinkling of variety of other book reviews. I'm doing a whole section on Native Americans in November. A whole bunch of non-religious Christian books and films throughout December. I have a sprinkling of secular homeschool stuff here and there, as well as some kids and travel stuff here and there, and there'll be more as time goes on. But that is it. Thank you.